Hey, this is Mr. Mitchell with another science video. Today we want to talk about fossils. Scientists learn a lot about the Earth's changes through fossils. Fossils, of course, are clues to past events and past life. But fossils are not just remains of living things. In fact, they rarely are. The actual bones that made up the animal in the fossil usually deteriorate. And what we see in the rocks are petrified minerals that have filled in the gaps where the bones once were. Imprints of bones and footprints are also considered fossils. Now let's talk about original remains. Sorry, I have to get to a certain something. Okay, I've got to it right here. Original remains are when you actually do have the original animal body parts. And like I said, that's very rare to have happen. And you almost always have to have something to preserve those body parts if you have something lasting for hundreds of or even into the thousands of years. Something like ice, something like tree sap. Now you'll probably see in the book that is called amber, and something like tar pits. Now off to the right here we have this mosquito-like something bug that has been trapped in amber, in a tree sap type something. And you can see you have the wings that have preserved, you have the little legs that have been preserved, and it just hasn't deteriorated because it's been protected by that tree sap. And the same thing can happen in tar pits. There's actually a famous tar pit in Los Angeles called the La Brea tar pits, where you find like saber-toothed tigers, and you can actually find the actual remains of them. And you can get woolly mammoths out of ice way up in the northern regions. Fossils, of course, are only going to be found in sedimentary rock. You're just not going to find them in igneous rock. They have been burned up if they get in igneous rock. And metamorphic rock probably has more of a chance of having a fossil, but still you get all that heat and pressure, and at minimum it has changed any kind of fossil that makes it to that particular rock. Let me talk about some kinds of fossils. There are four kinds here. You have a mold fossil or a cast fossil. Now a mold or cast fossil is when you have like the imprint of a fossil. Now I think I have a better picture in a different place. Yes, here is an imprint of some kind of shell. Now it's not the actual shell, but it's an imprint of it. And you may remember that imprints are also considered fossils. Let's go back to the last page. Another kind of fossil is petrified wood. Now we have off to the right down here an example of petrified wood. And you can see it doesn't look like the normal wood. What had happened here, I don't know what happened there, but what had happened in this wood is that you had the minerals from water that filled in the tree's cells, and those minerals eventually hardened. Now that's similar to what actually happens in fossils themselves. When you have this fossil right here, this is not going to be the actual bones. The minerals have petrified and filled in all the cells here, and they have hardened. Now it usually doesn't have as pretty a look as this petrified wood does. You can actually find whole logs that have been petrified. Another kind of fossil is a carbon film, and I'll show you more of that in the next one. A carbon film is like this. Every living thing has carbon in it. Plants, animals, humans. And when an organism decays, it sometimes leaves a visible layer of carbon. And that's exactly what this is. This is not the plant. This is not the petrified version of the plant. It is actually carbon that has been imprinted there, because all living things have carbon on it, and it has stuck there. Another kind of fossil is called a trace fossil. Now a trace fossil is no actual bones. It is no petrified minerals. It's just evidence that the animal was there. Things such as footprints, like we see right up here. That's evidence that that dinosaur was there. Animal holes, and on rare occasions, ancient poo. It happens to be considered a trace fossil. One way scientists find fossils are with ice cores, and that's exactly what's going on here. Snow on Greenland and Antarctica has built up over many thousands of years, and that glacier is just not melting. And what scientists do, they drill into the ice and take these tubular samples called ice cores. And it tells them about the past by how deep the fossil is, or where the air pockets are, or where there are traces of volcanic ash, or just many different things that a ice core can tell you. Now, I do want to talk about relative age versus absolute age, important terms in fossil finding. The relative age is the age of an event or object in relation to other events or objects. For example, say you have two cousins, and you know which one's older and which one's younger, but you might not can say their actual ages, but you know one is older and one is younger. Until the 1900s, that's how scientists used fossils. They knew which animals came first, but they didn't know their exact ages or when they actually died. And relative age is easy in sedimentary rock because the oldest fossils are going to be the lowest in a sedimentary embankment. The newest fossils will be closer to the surface. Now the actual age, well, you can probably figure out that one out. It's the actual age of an event or object. And it wasn't until the 1900s that scientists could really figure out much of an actual age. How do they do that? Well, it's an atom's half-life. This is kind of a complicated concept, so let's see if we can try to get this. Atoms of many chemical elements break down at a predictable rate. The half-life is the length of time it takes for half of those atoms to break down. So scientists can measure the rate of any given rock deterioration to estimate the age of the fossil. Now, what's often used, the particular atom that's often used is carbon-14. Now, keep in mind, we have carbon in every living thing. Carbon-14 is just a little bit different than regular carbon. It's kind of an unpredictable variation of carbon. But still, since we have carbon in every living thing, there's a good chance you would have some carbon-14 in every living thing too. Now, carbon-14's half-life is 5,730 years. I don't have my notepad with me, but let's see if I can mark that down. 5,730 years is how long it takes for half of the carbon-13 to deteriorate. Carbon-14 is used for dating objects between 100 years old and 70,000 years old. Now, you may wonder, well, why doesn't all the carbon-14 deteriorate after 10 or 11,000 years? Because its half-life is this. Well, it's a little more complicated than that, because the half-life every 5,730 years is when half of what is remaining deteriorates. So after 5,730 years, half of the carbon-14 would deteriorate. After 11,460 years, which is double that, another half would have deteriorated, which leaves a fourth. Then you would leave an eighth. Then you would leave a 16th. So it would really be a long time before all that carbon-14 is gone. But it still has a predictable rate. So if you take a fossil that can find traces of carbon-14, you can take a good stab as to how old it is. This is, however, an easier process in igneous rocks, because all this sedimentary rock has bits and pieces of different kinds and different ages of rock anyway. So you may have a plant, for example, this plant right here, which becomes fossilized 30 years ago. All this rock around it may be hundreds of thousands of, well, thousands of years old. But it is misleading if we take some of this rock and end up dating it something that turns out to be 100 years old. So it's a little bit stickier than it sounds.